In the year 1997, beneath the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado Grad, the greatest archaeological discovery in human history was repurposed for the noblest cause imaginable, the liberation of the galaxy from capitalist oppression. The Stargate program, once a tool of American imperialism, had been transferred to the newly established People's Republic of America. Under the visionary leadership of General Hammondov, the program's mission was clear: spread the glorious revolution to the stars by any means necessary. The team assembled for this sacred mission represented the finest specimens of revolutionary consciousness. Colonel Jack O'Neilsky, a gruff military pragmatist who had traded his sidearm for an AK-47. Major Samantha Carterova, a brilliant physicist who viewed every technical challenge through the lens of collective engineering. And Dr. Danil Jacksonoff, an overeager archaeologist whose enthusiasm for Marxist theory was matched only by his ability to find evidence of primitive communism everywhere. But the team's greatest asset was their newest member, Teal'Cov, formerly known as Teal'c. Once a first prime in service to the false god Apophis, he had been liberated through extensive re-education. The golden serpent tattoo on his forehead had been replaced with a hammer and sickle, and his loyalty to his former master had been thoroughly purged. Together, they traveled across the galaxy, liberating primitive peoples from the tyranny of the Goa'uld, known throughout the stars as the System Czars. Their first triumph came with the overthrow of Tsar Apophis, whose defeat was heralded as the dawn of a new revolutionary age. Teal'Cov's people, the Jaffa, greeted their liberators with tears of joy, though they had yet to experience the full enlightenment of Marxism. Teal'Cov, now a fresh convert to the cause, proclaimed the founding of the People's Free Republic of Jaffa and named himself chairman. His first decree was ambitious: the immediate establishment of collective potato farms on every barren moon within Jaffa territory. But this was just the beginning. General Hammondov's 5-year plan demanded the liberation of 1,000 worlds by the end of the decade. SG-1 threw themselves into their work with revolutionary fervor, toppling system czars and proclaiming people's republics from one end of the galaxy to the other. At first, they were greeted as heroes. Crowds cheered their arrival, grateful for release from centuries of Goa'uld oppression. But the applause grew dimmer, with every world liberated. For the people soon discovered that their new liberators demanded impossible grain quotas, endless re-education seminars, and the construction of labor camps on every moon with breathable air. Even the primitive Unas were declared counter-revolutionaries and sentenced to honest labor in underground mines. But SG-1's greatest challenge lay ahead. Deep space sensors detected an approaching fleet of advanced vessels. First contact with the Asgard was imminent. The meeting took place on a neutral world. Thor, supreme commander of the Asgard fleet, materialized before the human delegation with typical Nordic efficiency. At first, the exchange was cordial. The Asgard, confident in their superiority, offered small tokens of technology for study, harmless devices, intended only to help humanity defend itself against the system czars. They assumed that a species capable of interstellar travel must also be capable of honesty, reason, and restraint. They were wrong. When General Hammondov asked if the Asgard were familiar with the teachings of Karl Marx, Thor replied politely that they were not, explaining that Asgard society was built upon science and logic. To Hammondov, this was nothing less than a confession of counter-revolutionary tendencies. The general drew his sidearm and shot Thor dead in the council chamber. Thus perished Thor, an ancient wise alien who had spent millennia outmaneuvering the Goa'uld, only to be undone in 5 minutes by a paranoid communist with a gun. The Asgard delegation was stunned. They had never imagined a race so duplicitous, so petty, and so utterly enslaved to ideology. They believed the humans would act with dignity, as all civilized races did. Instead, their gifts were seized, their trust betrayed, and their ships annihilated by weapons Carterova had reverse-engineered in record time. With Asgard technology now in their possession, SG-1's campaign of liberation accelerated beyond imagination. Entire star systems fell in days, trembling before the fury of revolutionary conviction. Within months, the system czars, who had ruled for millennia, were swept aside like rotten monarchs before a firing squad. Their empires dissolved into people's republics overnight, but success bred paranoia. General Hammondov's 5-year plan was ahead of schedule, yet with each victory came new fears. Colonel O'Neilsky's growing popularity as a war hero made him a potential rival. Major Carterova's brilliance with Asgard technology marked her as dangerously competent. Late at night, Hammondov pored over reports, convinced that counter-revolutionaries surrounded him. The purges began quietly. First, minor personnel disappeared for ideological review. Then, Major Carterova was reassigned to a remote research post, a barren asteroid with no air, no equipment, and no laboratory. Official records later described her as lost in the pursuit of glorious socialist progress. O'Neillsky lasted longer, his military stature shielding him for a time, but his plain-spoken pragmatism eventually marked him as a threat to Hammondov's authority. Since purging him outright was politically unviable, the general devised a more elegant solution, a solo reconnaissance mission to the last heavily armed Goa'uld stronghold, located on a moon with no atmosphere. When O'Neillsky questioned the logic of the order, Hammondov personally drew his pistol, backed by a squad of armed guards, and marched the reluctant war hero into the gate room. O'Neillsky saluted his comrades one final time before being forced through at gunpoint. The wormhole snapped shut, and the base erupted in orchestrated applause, while whispers spread that Earth's greatest war hero had just been executed by bureaucracy in its purest form. Only Dr. Daniel Jacksonov remained, spared from the purges not for his competence, but for his unwavering ideological purity. It was Jacksonov who proposed the next great leap forward. Why waste time liberating worlds one at a time? Why not keep the Stargate open permanently, linking dozens of planets at once? He called it the open portal policy. Hammondov was intrigued. It promised an endless supply of grateful workers to fill Earth's labor camps, and it carried the sort of reckless ambition that only a fool would suggest, and only a paranoid communist would approve. It was perfect. Within weeks, the modifications were complete. The Stargate roared to life, its shimmering surface locked open to half the galaxy. At first came the refugees, peasants and warriors fleeing famine and re-education camps on liberated worlds. Then came the Goa'uld survivors, Jaffa armies thirsting for revenge, and nameless creatures thought long dead. Soon, replicators poured through, devouring everything in sight, followed by missionaries of the Ori, declaring themselves the new gods of humanity. The liberation had become an invasion. Within hours, Earth itself was under siege. In desperation, General Hammondov turned to his newest expert, Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov. Dyatlov, with his unique expertise in nuclear catastrophes, was the most qualified man they could find. Faced with annihilation, Dyatlov did what he always did. He tried to go home. After traversing countless universes, from the smoking ruins of Tubbyland to the collapsing kingdoms of Middle-earth, he had grown weary of endless disasters and exploding realities. The safest coordinates he knew were not a fortified stronghold or a hidden sanctuary, but the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, April 26, 1986. A place where, in his words, nothing goes wrong. Until that moment, the Stargate had never been considered capable of time travel, but in the hands of Dyatlov, the impossible became inevitable. The wormhole flared open, linking Cheyenne Mountain directly to the heart of the reactor at the instant of meltdown. A tidal wave of radioactive steam and fire poured through the gate, incinerating invaders, annihilating armies, and ending the siege in a single stroke. Earth was spared, though Cheyenne Mountain was reduced to a glowing tomb. Beyond the broken gate system, the revolution lived on. On Chulak, Chairman Teal'Cov of the People's Republic of Jaffa surveyed endless potato fields where once proud warriors had stood. To his mind, the future of the galaxy had never looked brighter, and so ended humanity's brief experiment in galactic liberation. The Stargate was sealed, the program buried in secrecy, and the galaxy left to heal from the wounds of ideological enthusiasm. The stars, it seemed, were not ready for liberation. Perhaps they never would be.